Hey, this is Chris Walker with evangelismcoach.org. I want to say thank you for joining in this particular greeter teleclass. This is number 2 in a series that I will be making. This class was originally recorded in a live format in a webinar context, but because of so many problems with the sound, I've chosen to re-record it, add a couple of slides, and one thing that will be missing is some of the live interaction that is normally held in the online teleclass. Now, every now and then it is a great idea to gather your greeters together to provide a refresher for the hospitality vision of your congregation, to provide a fresh opportunity to impart some new skills and to grow in new areas and abilities in order to improve the entire welcome process of your church. I'm glad that you have chosen to set apart some time in order to watch this DVD or the video download. And this is something that you can then share with new greeters that are joining your team. Now, before we get started, one or two particular tips that I want to share with you is that this presentation is accompanied by a handout. You'll need to visit the link that you see there on your screen to download the handout. It is in a PDF format, so you'll need any kind of PDF reader, and it's a fill-in-the-blank type handout. It's not necessary to have, but it may enhance your experience as we walk through this course together. Now, that link is case sensitive, and I realized as I was sitting there looking at it that there may be some confusion as to what are the final 5 letters of that link. H as in Henry, V as in Victor, W as in William, Z as in Zebra, B as in Beta. It is case sensitive, and so that is a capital V and a capital W right there in the middle of the link. Also, the questions and answers that I received during the live event, as well as in some of the registration commentary, I will share the answers to some of those questions at the very end. And this will be available for you online. You'll be able to either download it or purchase it as a DVD. During the registration process, I received several questions with regards to recruiting new greeters, and I've decided to kick all those questions out to another webinar focused specifically on that particular issue. Now, a little bit about me is that my name is Chris Walker. I've been providing evangelism and church hospitality training for many years. Most recently, I started this website in 2007 called evangelismcoach.org, and it has grown into a full-time and international ministry where I provide evangelism training for churches, pastors, individuals, as well as hospitality training for churches in order to help churches and individuals be more effective in preaching the good news, in sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with their friends, neighbors, and visitors who come into their midst. I've been writing for the website now since about 2007, and as of this moment, there's over 900, nearly 1,000 articles on evangelism, hospitality, and congregational involvement in the community. Right now, I am on my second church plant in the city where I live. We are in the process of moving towards an Easter campaign where our church is involved in inviting a lot of people to church. And we want to have a great attendance, and then we want a lot of our visitors to come back. So part of that is in our own life, working at preparing and reviewing our hospitality systems so that our visitors might have a tremendous experience of our church, that the way that they attend our church may impact their ability to experience the sacred presence of God so that their life may be changed. Ultimately, our church simply doesn't want to gather on a Sunday morning out of habit. We want to change lives. So as part of that, even in our own church, we are thinking about the role that greeters play. Now, recently in January of 2013, I gave a seminar, and here's a little bit of feedback from that. It helped me to think through the hospitality ministry at my church and to evaluate the ways that we can improve our hospitality. Another one wrote, "Chris has so much to share about enthusiastic welcome and hospitality. I feel as though I've been able to establish goals which I've not been able to do previously." This is my desired outcome for our class today, that you will have some space in your notes or some ideas that form in your head that you will write down and begin to put into place here within the next 30 days to help improve the greeting and welcome process in your church. Now let me share with you the agenda that we're going to go through in this particular class. You see the 5 items that are up there on the screen. I'll start first off with about how greeters bring honor to your church and show honor to the visitors that come into their midst, to the midst of the church. I want to talk about different ways to how greeters prepare the way for visitors to experience the presence of God in the midst of the worship service. Then I'll cover 6 ways to detect visitors, or 6 ways to recognize the first-time visitors that are in your midst. Plus, I want to give more conversational small talk for nervous greeters, and then wrap it up with 5 ways to be a better greeter. Now, all of this is a new class and has not been recorded in any other format in any of my material. There is another DVD webinar aimed at greeters that is available at the evangelismcoach.org/store. Now, how comfortable are you? Take a brief inventory. How comfortable are you in the ministry of greeting? A rating of 1 would be someone who just wants to run away from it. I can't believe that I'm even thinking about participating in this ministry. Would somebody please give me another ministry in the church? If that's you, then maybe it is time to go look for a brand new ministry, or maybe God is calling you to grow in this particular area. In rating number 2, this would be someone who's kind of awkward or maybe too nervous, maybe shy to the point of nervous. And this is someone who is not quite so sure that they want to be a greeter, but is willing to give it a try. Someone at a level 3 is definitely willing to give it a try, but they're not quite sure what to do, and so there's a real intense desire to grow in a skill set, as well as be given some clear instructions about what is expected of them, or different ways that they can give a visitor a wonderful welcome. Number 4 is someone who is slightly enthusiastic, or someone who is confident that they can participate in this ministry. They simply want to be shown the way. Tell me where to go and I will do it is kind of that level of comfort. Finally, in skill level number 5, this would be, I absolutely love this ministry. I wake up thinking about the visitors that I will be meeting this morning. I look forward to the opportunities to pray with those visitors. I am excited about being a greeter in the church, and I simply want to do better. So take a brief inventory of where you are, and then if you are following along in your notes, simply put a little number on the side as to how comfortable you think you are in the midst of this. Now, as we move into the section, I realize that in order to think about different ways we can bring honor to our church, we want to just simply recall some of the ways that greeters can actually bring embarrassment to the church. Now, some of you probably have visited other churches and have had some interesting and perhaps awkward experiences. But now I want to share with you some real-life commentary that I picked up off of Twitter in order to be able to share with you some of the common experiences that people share. Now, whether or not these experiences are true is something that is unverifiable, but it is something that is commented on with enough frequency that I'm sure that some of these stories have some absolute validity to them. First off, the greeter at church told me I looked sexy this morning. Awkward. Not what I was going for. Another one writes, was a visitor in church for the first time in almost 9 years. Odd, but enlightening. Another one writes, I wish there weren't so many weird greeters in my church. And finally, this one writes, that awkward moment when the 80-year-old greeter at church says, you'd be nice to cuddle with for a while hugging you. Again, that's not exactly what we would really like our visitors to experience. Now, if you are in a group, perhaps you just want to hit the pause button for a little bit and do this particular exercise. Share an awkward greeting experience that you have had. I simply ask that you be respectful of the church, perhaps it even was your own, by leaving out the church name and leaving out the names of other individuals. Simply describe your experience and maybe some of the things that were said in your welcome experience. If you're watching this by DVD, just simply hit pause, or if you're streaming this on the download video, simply take some time and think and then share with those who are around you. If you are watching this by yourself, just kind of make a note to come back to this and maybe write it out and reflect upon this particular experience. Now, what I'd like to do is get into ways to not be on that list of embarrassing moments, how not to get your church's name out in Twitter. For greeters, it really starts with attitude. Having an attitude of compassion for the people who walk into the doors of your church is having a sense of compassion for them for all the obstacles that they have overcome. Also, you'll want to be able to fulfill this role with some enthusiasm. You'll want to look like you'll actually enjoy your work as a greeter. Recently, I attended a church where I was the first-time visitor, and it was a joy to be greeted by someone who really enjoyed that particular role. That sense of enthusiasm helps prepare the way. So fulfill your goal or fulfill your ministry with some joy, and a lot of that may start to take care of these may start to take care of some of these embarrassing moments. A second way is to encourage your visitors. Think and find ways to practically serve the visitors who come into your midst, to encourage them. After all, for a first-time visitor, perhaps they have overcome several challenges to attending. Perhaps they've researched your church on the internet. Perhaps they have rearranged their Sunday morning to make time to attend your worship service. Perhaps they have overcome some of the lateness of the morning, or some of the pressures of feeling of being late. Maybe there have been conflicts at home, but whatever the case may be is, perhaps they have overcome several challenges to actually attending to your church. Others may be coming to your church looking for a place to fit, a place where they can serve with their gifts, a place to be emotionally connected once again, perhaps if they are transferring from another community. Maybe someone is coming to your church who was in their last church for 50 some odd years but has retired and is looking for a place where they can feel just as emotionally connected to a new church as they did their own. Ultimately, your greeters want to make it easy for people to get to their seats. That is another way to encourage the visitors who come into your midst. And then the final way to not be on that list is to stop finding ways to cause embarrassment, either embarrassing the visitors who come into your midst or embarrassing your church. You certainly want to find ways as a greeter or hospitality ministry volunteer to find ways to eliminate the awkwardness that you might create simply by putting your foot in the mouth. Now, this is where I want to get into how do we bring honor to the church. How do we show honor in our activity? Well, once again, I turn to Twitter and I find all sorts of ways. So, we went to visit a new church today, and I can honestly say that I have never experienced more hospitality. Just amazing. Another one writes, just got an insanely encouraging email from a first-time visitor to Clear River News who was blown away by our hospitality. Great job, church. Another one writes, thanks to City of God Church for a special day. We love to worship with your church family. Your hospitality is amazing. Another one writes, wow, what an amazing church. Such friendly people. That's the way it should be. And finally, hey brother, was a first-time visitor today, and it was the best experience I've ever had at church. Looking forward to more. As you find ways not to be on that list, as you find ways to bring honor to your church, perhaps you can create some positive buzz around your church's community. You can create some positive buzz on some of the social networks which more and more people are participating in. Now, one of the things that I would like you to do is that once again, if you are in a group or watching this as a team, go ahead and hit the pause button and then share some of the positive comments that you have personally heard about the welcome experience in your church. Perhaps you have heard for some of the first-time visitors, or perhaps you have seen your church's name tweeted, or perhaps on Facebook people leave commentary on your church's Facebook page. But take a moment as a team, or if you are by yourself, simply make a note and think about some of the positive comments that you have personally heard about the welcome experience of your church. I believe that in some cases you will find that it was the attitude of a greeter, or how a greeter served somebody, or how a greeter did not create moments of awkwardness, or maybe even how a greeter brought honor to the church. Now, moving on to the next part of our agenda is that I want to talk a little bit about how greeters prepare the way. Actually, the work of serving as a church greeter is more than simply passing out a church bulletin. Handing someone a bulletin when they walk into church is not hospitality. That is simply moving paper. It looks as if many churches don't care whether you are there or not. And I can imagine that this particular comment refers to the common experience that perhaps many of us have had about simply receiving a piece of paper shoved into our hand as if it was a flyer or an announcement. From a greeter that doesn't bother to recognize us, or anybody for that matter, where there's no eye contact but simply a transaction of passing a paper from one hand to another. Of course that's not hospitality. It's reflected in the attitude. And we totally believe that greeters do more than pass out church bulletins. In fact, it is greeters that really prepare the way. A verse that has really been striking me during my thinking about these things is out of Mark 1 and 3. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight." The work of the greeter, in part, is to prepare the way for the visitor to experience the presence of God, to experience the sacredness of God, to experience the joy of the Lord in worship. It is the role of the greeter to help soften the hard edges, or to soften the roughness of the experience that somebody has already had prior to coming to church. Now, will it make a difference that a smile can change someone's eternity? By itself, probably not. But a smile can help take the rough edge off of someone's morning as they come in from a stressful situation. That smile can help prepare the way for them to hear the Word of God. Will a handshake make a difference in someone's eternity? Not by itself, but it may be one of many things that the Lord would use that morning to demonstrate God's care for the visitor who comes into the midst of the local church. Will eye contact make a difference? By itself, no. But it could be one of the many signs of a friendly face that helps to calm someone who's entirely stressed out coming to your church. The work of the greeter is part of the larger piece of the hospitality system. There are so many ingredients that happen in a Sunday morning service. From a human side, but then there's also God's working. And we may not need to worry so much about all the mistakes that we made, because God's sovereignty is more powerful than any of our mistakes. However, we can observe and watch and learn and find ways to remove those unnecessary barriers that our greeters or our hospitality experience may put up, even if by accident. So I want to give you two ways to talk about how greeters prepare the way for people to attend your worship service. Number one is that as a greeter, know your role in the entire hospitality system. You're more than just one person doing one task. You are part of the friendliness factor of the entire congregation. You are part of the entire welcome experience that your visitor will have. And you have one part in the entire role to play in affecting a visitor's decision to come back or not. And it could be that your particular way of greeting somebody may overcome some of the errors that have already been experienced in the morning, or errors in greeting that may occur later in the service. It is your role to help shape that welcome experience. Ultimately, it is God's role to do the drawing, to do the convicting of sin, but as one human to another, we can shape the experience of our community life together. Ultimately, your work as a greeter impacts the entire work of the church. If you are a greeter, it's important for you to realize that you are part of the larger system. A second way that greeters prepare the way is by showing honor to your guests. Showing honor to the guest, finding ways to delight in honoring one another. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other, Romans 12 and 10 says. Let me share with you a couple of different ways to show honor. And there are plenty others. And in the live class, I received a lot of suggestions from people participating, and I've turned those now into a slide. But the four that I showed initially is to find ways to make sure that you greet each child that walks in with their family. Find ways to hold doors open for people as they come into their midst. Respect boundaries. And part of what I mean by that is that if someone doesn't want to shake your hand, don't force the issue. Another way to show honor to the ministry of serving as a greeter is to show up on time or to reschedule if something has come up and you need to find somebody else to take your place. Don't just show up, or don't just fail to show up, as that brings dishonor to your work as a greeter. Additional ways that were given to me by the participants of our class, and some of these are pretty common sense, but these are good reminders nonetheless. Take the time to make eye contact with people and smile. In fact, show them personally where the children's ministry classrooms are if there are children that are involved. Find ways to make your visitors feel important as they come into the midst. A good question that you may want to think about asking during the small talk afterwards is, can I introduce you to the staff? Another way to show honor to your visitor, as mentioned, is not to force a handshake and respect that boundary. Another way is to speak to someone you don't know. Those are just some of the different ways that members of the live class pitched in when it came time to talk about ways to show honor. Now, moving on to our next segment is 6 ways to detect visitors. This is actually probably one of the most common questions that I receive. What are some different ways that we can recognize the first-time visitors in our midst? The more I thought about this, recognize, of course, could have 2 ways of meaning. One is, how do we publicly recognize them from the front or during the worship service? How do we acknowledge that their presence is here? But I think the context that I'm often asked to speak to are, how do we detect who of our visitors might be visiting us for the first time? And so in this particular segment, I want to look at 6 ways that they can do it. First off, thinking about the small church, and a small or maybe medium size. I'm thinking of a church of about 200 at the most. In churches of that size, you have the advantage of knowing who is the visitor. If you have been attending your congregation for a while, you pretty much know, at least by face, who the regular attenders are in your congregation. This is one of the advantages that a small church has. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was the first-time visitor in a church of about 70 people. I was the invited guest, and I was actually preaching that morning. But just out of curiosity, I began to wonder how I may be able to recognize a first-time visitor when I am the first-time visitor in a smaller church. There really wasn't a way for me to know any of the people that were there, so I didn't quite have that same level of familiarity that you might have if you were in a small church. But the way that I was able to recognize or observe or detect or perhaps guess as to who was a first-time visitor is that these were people who were sitting by themselves and not talking to anyone either before or after the service. These were people who seemed to be keeping to themselves. And when I asked the pastor, I discovered that for most of the folks I was able to guess that yes, these were indeed first-time visitors. So that is one of the ways. Now, if you are in a larger church, it is unlikely that your visitors will dress up as clowns. In fact, you may be able to think through some of the different ways that you may be able to detect who are the first-time visitors. And on that same trip that I made in January, I actually spent I had a long layover in the Atlanta airport. And for those of you who are familiar with the Atlanta airport, you know that it is a very large airport. And in my layover time, I began to ask myself the question, could I tell who of these people seemed to be for the first time in the Atlanta airport? In fact, I want to share with you some of these lessons that I learned from watching people in the airport, because I do think that they are appropriate in large churches as well. So this starts with number 2 and following in this list of 6. The first one, I guess this would be number 2. Number 2 is a sense of tentativeness in the physical space of your sanctuary. There's not an observable confidence in where they are going. There is a sense that perhaps they may be walking in the wrong direction or not quite sure where to go, or perhaps maybe taking time to observe the crowd to see where the crowd is flowing. But that tentativeness or hesitancy is something that may hint that they are a first-time visitor in your building. Another one is that they are looking above people's heads and looking for signage. And this is something that really stuck out to me as I was looking at the airport and as I have been on some of the larger campuses of churches, is that first-time visitors are often looking for directions, looking for places to go, looking for the right place to go, and there's a way of kind of looking overhead, over the top of other people to try to find out the right direction. Another lesson I learned from the airport, and this would be the fourth one in our list, is that these are people who kind of approach official-looking people for your church and asking questions. Where is this? What is that? Where do I get this information? Where is the bathroom? Where do I take my children? These are people who will draw near to the official staff workers of your church, or the people who look like they're the volunteers, and they will be asking questions that first-time visitors tend to ask. Number 5 is the visitors may tend to be ignored in the midst of all of the crowd. That you can tell kind of those who are busy socializing because they know some of the people in their midst, but those who are not socializing with anybody at all may be, and the key word there, may be a first-time visitor who is in your midst, particularly if they are just simply flipping through the bulletin while waiting for something to happen. And then finally, these may be people who are sitting by themselves. They don't seem to be engaged with the people who are around them. And as I've been in some of the large churches, these are just some of the signs that may hint that they are first-time visitors. So it's not like this is absolute rocket science, that this is an absolute 100% accurate description, but these might give you some visible clues as to who in your midst might be a first-time visitor. Moving on to the next section, I want to get into a little bit more of conversational small talk for nervous greeters. And one of the most common questions in the registration process for this particular class was a desire to find additional things to say, additional ways to break the ice, additional ways to get conversations started. So let me give you some icebreakers, and let's have a little bit of fun as we look at some that have failed miserably. That awkward moment when you're holding hands with your dad walking into church and the greeter tells you what a good-looking couple you make. Another one says, "Nice to meet you. Who the hell are you?" said the greeter at church this morning. And then finally, "Just remembered a greeter at church slipped me a note with his number in it. I guess I have to be polite. Call and let him down easy." Now perhaps you've had some commentary as well, you've had some experiences, and so if you are with a group, take some time and share some of those groups as some of those commentaries as well. Now when it comes to small talk, you want to think about the place, you want to think about the environment, you want to look for those conversational opportunities. If you are serving as a greeter and it is during that transitional time between services, or it is when people are rapidly entering the building, shaking hands with somebody as they enter into your building is not the best place for conversational small talk. Rather, look for opportunities during your service or after your service where, as a greeter, you intentionally look for somebody you don't know, somebody that you think may be a first-time visitor, and find ways to approach them and engage them in small talk. So you'll want to look for the right place and the opportunity. You certainly don't want to stalk them, but rather you are looking for people who are open for conversation. In fact, that's part of what respecting boundaries means, is that sometimes when you're talking with people, you can tell that they are kind of closed to further conversation. And if that's the case, simply respect that boundary and move on. You know, we are all humans, we're not robots. And ultimately, we want to respect the boundaries that people put in place. I would also add that as a greeter, I want you to make sure that you know your church's programs and resources. Perhaps during the conversation that you have with your visitor, you will hear things that your church programming or resources may be able to solve or meet, or something that you may be able to recommend to help that person take the next low commitment next step. Finally, in making some small talk, you really want to do your best to listen. Listen for the greeter. Listen for the needs of the visitor. Listen for what they do. Listen even for their name. And then listen to find ways that you may be able to meet some need that may be shared with you. Listen for opportunities to pray, perhaps, before they go home. Now, I want to give you a couple of different slides with some examples of some useful icebreakers, and you can probably think of many more. But often what I have found for first-time greeters is that they want to have a couple of questions at the ready so that they don't feel so nervous when talking with a visitor for the first time. So let me give you a couple of favorite questions to ask, and not all of these are appropriate in the right context, but rather consider them as useful questions to have when the right moment comes. For example, how did you find our church this morning? Or what do you do in your day job? Or what do you do in your night job? Or what do you do for work? How do you earn a living? What school do you attend and what is your major? In the first church that I planted, we had several different universities, and so this was a common question that we often made small talk about. If the conversation is going well enough, this may be something that you might want to use. What do you sense God has in mind for you? And ultimately, that may be a little personal, but you may decide that that is an appropriate conversational question when, if you've been lingering in conversation with this person for a while. Other useful questions: do you know anyone that attends here? Are you looking for a church home? Another question would be, where do you live? Or even an invitation: will you sit with me during the service? And there are many other conversation starters. In fact, one of the articles on my website is Conversational Small Talk for Greeters. And you should be able to find a bunch of conversational questions to use. Now here in our final segment, I really want to share with you a couple of different ways to become a better greeter. Once again, in the registration process, this was probably the third most common expression in the registration information, is that people want to be a better greeter. And let me give you 5 ways. The first one is to really be excited about your role as a greeter. Someone once commented here, I'm so excited, I get to be a greeter for this function at church. It's amazing to do that. I love it. Another one writes, being a greeter is the best job in church. Meeting with a hospitality ministry tonight, super excited to start serving, and finally getting ready for church, first time serving as a greeter. Be excited about your work, and this really goes back to your role as a greeter. You just might be part of the difference in God's work in making a life impact. Number 2, spend time praying. Do not forget to pray. This is, after all, a spiritual ministry, serving as a doorkeeper at the house of the Lord. You want to make sure that you spend time praying for your visitors, that God would pour out His blessing upon them, that they would experience God's love in the midst of your congregation, that they will experience the truth and the conviction of the Holy Spirit, that they would experience the proclamation of God's Word. You want to invest that time in prayer, and as you do, you also pray for your church. Pray that your church members would be welcoming to the visitors who come into their midst. And then you can also pray for your ministry and for the role that you will have that day or that month to serve as a greeter. These are some areas that are often neglected when we approach greeting as simply a job. We pass out a bulletin, but rather, instead of spending that time investing in praying for our guests. Number 3, respect boundaries. I've mentioned this a couple of times already during the webinar, but the reality is that not everyone wants a handshake or a hug. Here's some of the evidence of that. I don't mind going to church, but I feel awkward when everyone is so friendly and they greet you. Or another one says, just got back from church. Down south, churches are too friendly. I did not ask for 30 people to hug me. This may be cultural in various different regions. It may be cultural in some of the different countries in terms of what is an appropriate level of contact. Is it a handshake? Is it a hug? Is it a kiss on the cheek? Our cultures are different with regards to that. But even in the United States, our cultures are different depending on where we live. You'll really need to know your culture well so that you can participate with the norms of your culture. But don't force anybody into the handshake or the hug. If they've got their hands in their pocket, just let them stay there. Number 4, value your role. As I've mentioned, your role may, and the experience that visitors have of you, may impact their decision to return. You are busy preparing the way, and you are one of many people who are pointing to Jesus that way. So serve in that role with honor. And finally, number 5 is work at accepting one another. Think about your guest and finding ways to express that acceptance of them. It could be that you invite them back. It could be that you give a high five to their children. It could be that you find ways to say, come and join us for lunch after the service is over. You certainly don't want to judge people for their status or condition. You don't want to judge people for their state of sinfulness at this point. You don't want to judge people for what they are doing, but really you want to prepare the way so that people can hear the Word of God proclaimed and experience the power of God changing their life. Of these 5 areas that I've just mentioned, which do you think that you need to grow in the most? Perhaps you can just kind of put those in an order, from the order of the one that you need to grow into the most, and then the one that you are doing pretty well at. You can maybe rearrange these 5. And then what I want you to do is to think, okay, here in the next 30 days, how can I grow in this particular area? If I need to grow in prayer, how can I spend time in the next 30 days praying for the ministry of the church? If I need to grow in respecting boundaries, what do I need to do to be more observant about people and their interactions of me? If I need to grow in accepting one another, do I need to repent for the ways that I have judged other people? These are just some things that you can spend some time, maybe as a team. Just hit pause and leave this particular slide up on the screen so that you can see and observe and talk and maybe discuss, or maybe to write down on the notes that are right there on the side of your paper. Now at this point, I want to get into some of the questions that were asked of me. Again, because this is a re-recording, I can't address live questions, but I have some of them and I will share the answers here. Also, during the registration process, I gathered a bunch of questions that people submitted, and so I've grouped them all together into some common themes and will address them here. If you have a question that I don't answer in this particular one, I invite you to visit the evangelismcoach.org page on Facebook and ask your question there, and when I see it, I will also address it. Facebook.com/evangelismcoach or evangelismcoach.org. Now, one of the questions that I've been asked several times in this webinar is, how do I remember people's names? So I want to quickly give you 6 different ways to remember names of the first-time visitors that you meet. The first off is just pay attention. Pay attention to hearing their name said. As I was coming home from a recent trip, there was another commuter on the plane that I have seen for many years, and so this time I actually walked up to him and introduced myself and started talking with him, and I realized when I walked away that even though he told me his name, I wasn't paying attention and just don't remember. And so I speak to myself, pay attention when you trade names with these first-time visitors. Maybe in your mind, make a quick association of something in your experience. Something that people often say to me is that my last name being Walker, sometimes people quickly think of Walker, Texas Ranger, the Chuck Norris TV show from many years ago, and that's just one thing that they happen to remember. But you can make all sorts of different associations, like my aunt's name was Marcia, where you went to school. There's all sorts of different ways to make quick associations, and that may jog your memory with regards to their name. When the conversation is over, jot down a few notes about the conversation. Or maybe once you've paid attention and you've gotten their name, repeat it back to them with a compliment, or maybe use it once or twice in a conversation, just so that the name stays in the forefront of your mind. And then this is one that I really like, is to pray for the person during the week. As you pray for them by name, asking the Lord to continue His work in their life, and that they would come back to church next week. And then, of course, if you see them the following week, greet them by name. Often that is an amazing blessing to the person who comes back. Another question that has come up regularly in the midst of the registration process for finding different ways to identify believers versus seekers. Identifying someone who is a follower of Christ with someone who is not yet a follower of Christ. And a brief warning about that is that you may not be able to detect that in the first visit. Now, sometimes it may be revealed in conversation. It may be revealed that they're not a follower of Christ based on some of the questions that they're asking. It may be revealed that in the conversation that they are not churchgoers, that they've not been a churchgoer, that perhaps this is the first time they've been in a church in a long time. Or it could be that they are actively involved in a church in their prior community and they've just moved here and they're looking for a new thing. So sometimes it might be revealed in a conversation, but I don't think it's really appropriate for us in our first conversations to put a litmus test on the people that God brings into our midst. So we certainly don't need to rush this particular discovery. A third question that I'm asked very frequently is, how do we make guests feel welcome? And this, of course, refers to the entirety of the hospitality experience and the entire experience of your primary worship service. And I've written a lot about that. It's at the Evangelism Coach website. I've got a book called How to Welcome Church Visitors. It's an ebook that you can get. And I do a lot of other training that is focused on systems and don't want to take a whole lot of time to get into that, but simply to point the resources in that direction. So if you want to learn more about some of the systems, that would be a place to go. I don't really have the time to go into it here. But one point that I do want to raise is that of suggesting simple next steps to belonging. Thinking about different ways that visitors become members in your congregation. So many churches may have so many different ways, or they may not even have a way defined. But as a greeter team or as a hospitality team, perhaps you can think of some simple next steps that are low commitment to help a person develop some of those new friendships. And that is one of the ways to help make a guest feel welcome. But there are plenty of other ways by focusing on all of the different systems that are involved in hospitality. Another product that I have is called Break the Unseen Barriers, and that may also help you evaluate your particular hospitality systems. Finally, another question that I got during the Real Live event is on the use of name tags. Name tags for all your church members or name tags for the ministry team. And I'll share with you my personal opinion, and I kind of go against the grain with some of the other church growth teachers. I personally don't like name tags for all of the church members. We tried them for a while and discovered that they were just a little too cumbersome to maintain. People would take them home and run them through the wash. People would forget to pick them up. It just really became an administrative nightmare. Some churches are choosing to use them, and I actually have written 6 or 7 articles on my website about different ways to use name tags, but I personally don't like them. What I do like, however, is the use of name tags for your volunteers that are serving in ministry that day. Even if it is just a badge that is branded with your church logo, certainly, or maybe a lanyard of some kind with your church logo and the name on it, I do think that that is entirely appropriate for your altar workers, for your ushers, for your greeters, for the parking lot attendants, all the different teams that you have. It lends a level of officialness to their role, and also provides kind of that front porch mentality or that open door mentality that I'm available to answer your question. It's an easy way to identify the official people for that morning so that your visitors, if they have questions, they can find somebody to answer those particular questions. So I do think that name tags or badges would be appropriate for your volunteers. Now, at this point, I don't have any other questions and answers prepared, and because this is a re-recording, I'm going to go ahead and wind up here. If you do have some commentary about this particular DVD or video, I invite you to send it to me at pastor_Chris@evangelismcoach.org, or share it via Twitter or on our Facebook page. And I look forward to being with you all in another class and in a future date.